start. Let's go live with the poster there, but we'll just start the conversation. And live and recording. Thank you. Okay. Just a moment, everyone, please. Thanks for being patient. Thanks for joining us on this nice Sunday morning. Temperatures are still good. The skies are still good in some parts of India. So hope you're watching it, watching the sky and enjoying, what you like best.
Well, I'm in Wisconsin, and our temperatures are just gradually climbing into the double digits. We were sub-zero for a very long time.
Tim is on Mars, where it's always sub-zero and still clear skies.
Yeah. Actually, it's Southern California, and it was 70 degrees Fahrenheit today, so it was nice.
We warmed up to 20 Fahrenheit today instead of minus 20.
And that's why I live in Southern California.
Perfect.
So, needless to say, I haven't done any sky gazing at night from the outside for at least 6-8 weeks.
So that's great. I mean, great having you all here. And today we have our other participants joining in from across the country and maybe even from some other places in the region across the world. We've had several registrations, so we are expecting everybody to join in while the session warms up. And so let me start by welcoming our guest speakers today on behalf of the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics. I am Samir Dhurde, and it's a great pleasure to have Tim Robertson and Dr. Sanjay Limaye here. They are scientists, and they work on astronomy and astrophysics and space missions. But right now they are kind of here to represent the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, which is an organization dedicated to the observations of these two kinds of bodies, lunar as in the moon, and of planets and other small bodies in the solar system. So we are here and eager to listen to the work of ALPO, and also to see how the amateur astronomers who are joining in here, whose age range is right from high school to, as I said, senior citizens, but all with serious interest in astronomy, to be here on a Sunday morning listening to an interaction. So they are here, and I now would request both of you to take the floor in your conversation, in your presentation, in which we'll try to give them more exposure to what kind of observations are possible and how they can contribute seriously with even with amateur tools and techniques. So shall I start with Dr. Sanjay?
I was going to suggest maybe Tim might want to explain a little bit of history of Alpo.
Great. And we can go in that order. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a little PowerPoint presentation put together that
outlines
pretty much the organization.
So while you start the screen sharing, Tim Robertson has joined us here, and he joined ALPO in 1972, as he was just telling me. So that's quite a lot of time in the organization, which is grown, and it supports a lot of amateur and professional astronomers. And he's also worked at JPL, and as you can see in the background, the Perseverance rover is there. So he's worked on Mars missions, rover missions as well in the past. So we have got an excellent person to speak about planetary science. So welcome Tim, and let's we are looking forward to your talk.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate the invite, and any chance I have to talk about the Association of Lunar Planetary Observers, I jump at. As you mentioned, I've been a member of them since the early 70s. And I'm now on the board of directors, so I've gone quite a ways with the organization. Professionally, you mentioned I worked at JPL. I'm currently working with Goddard Space Flight Center on a weather satellite program called JPSS, and we're building some weather satellites we've launched 2 already, and we're preparing to launch another 3. So that's my current project I'm working on professionally. Tim Robertson, I run the ALPO training program. I'll talk a lot about that during here. And also you mentioned the podcast, the Observer's Notebook podcast. I'm the host of the podcast as well.
Okay.
The ALPO is an international group of interested people in astronomy. And as our name suggests, we focus on lunar and planetary observing. And everything from the sun, asteroids, meteors, all sorts of objects in our solar system. And our goal is to stimulate, coordinate, and promote observations and studies. And we want people to use any telescope they have. The best telescope you use is the best telescope you have is the one you're using, not the one sitting in your closet. Okay, you got to get up there and use it. And we work with both amateur and professional astronomers as well. That's why Sanjay is here, because he's one of our mentors in that field. The ALPO is for beginners, novice observers. It's a place to learn how to make observations, not just looking through your telescope, but actually figuring out what you're looking at and record those observations so they can be used as scientific studies and published in our journal. Advanced amateurs, if you've been looking through a telescope for a number of years and you like what you do, but you want to do something a little bit more, well, the Alpo is a good place to go for that too, because now these observations you're making will be put toward be published in papers. And professional astronomers use us as a resource for studies to see what we've done, and actually NASA has used Alpo for Mars observations and Jupiter observations and Saturn observations. It all began back in 1947 by this gentleman, Walter H. Haas. He wanted to start a astronomy organization in the United States that focused on lunar and planetary observing. So that's where we all began. And the ALPO, our structure, we have about 17 different sections that focus on different areas. The 2 types, they're observational areas and non-observational or special interest programs that we have within the organization. The observational ones are basically the solar, Mercury, all of the planets. We had no official structure when we started, but Walter really wanted us to be like the British Astronomical Association, their structure. And they had different sections for different areas of observation. So that's how he started it. At the beginning, we had a leader or a coordinator for all sections, and that was called the recorder. Now we call them coordinators today. But this slide here is just an example of some of the observations that we gathered. Drawings. Drawings are very important in the Alpo. The lunar section. This is one of the most popular sections in the Alpo. And we have different areas within the Alpo. A lot of astronomers overlook the moon. They go out, take their telescopes out when the moon's not in the sky. Well, the moon's very exciting to observe. It looks different every single night. The albedo and the shadows of the different lunar features changes at all times. And some of the lunar sections we have are the topographic studies, lunar transient phenomenon, meteoric impact search, and lunar dome survey. I'll talk a little bit about those a little later. And other observational sections we have the minor planet section, remote planets, comets, meteors, eclipses, Venus and Mercury transits, and we just started last year a section on exoplanets. So amateurs that want to get into observing exoplanets, this is the place to go. And the coordinators, like I said, each group has a coordinator that runs that section. What they do is they collect and they study the observations that are sent to them. They correspond with the observers that send the observations. And if beginners have questions, they contact in constant communication with beginners to help them with their observations. And then they contribute reports to our journal that's published quarterly. First section I want to talk about is the solar section. It's interesting. It's one of the most active sections right now, and the sun is least active right now. But there are observations every single day that people are making of the sun, because it's important. If there are no sunspots on the sun or no major activity, that we need to know that, because we're trying to track solar maximum as a period of solar rotation takes place. And Rick Hill is our coordinator for that. So if you have a solar filter, white solar filter, you want to do some drawings or photographs of the sun, we're more than welcome to take those. The Mercury section. Mercury is an interesting object. Frank Maleo is our coordinator, and it's really overlooked by a lot of people. Not many people want to look at Venus. It's a challenge to see, it's a challenge to see Mercury, because it's usually pretty close to the sun. But the observations are very important that the Mercury section does too. We have some very dedicated amateur astronomers that observe Mercury. And here's just some of the photographs that have been taken of the planet. So Mercury is an interesting planet to do. The Venus section. Venus is easy to see, but it's difficult to observe any detail. And that's the trick with observing Venus. I mean, Julius Betten is our coordinator. He's also the executive director of the Alpo right now. But the Venus section's a fun section to do, because there you're starting to learn the value of color filters with your observations. And Venus is really working well with the different color filters and bringing out the cloud details, as you see here in these photographs. Mars. Obviously, right now it's one of the most popular sections. I don't know why. Something happened this week, I think, that brought on everybody's interest in this planet. But for years, Mars has been the #1 planet that people have observed because of its close approaches that it has to the sun, to the Earth, and the ease of observing it. But it's also a challenge. It's also a challenge, and it's fun to see these types of things. And Roger Venable's the coordinator, and both visual drawings and photographs are welcome to the Mars section. Jupiter. Everybody loves Jupiter because we can see it rotate in one night. Basically, it rotates so quickly. And it's one of the most popular to photograph, and it's also one of the most popular to draw the planet. And watching the dance of the moons also is a lot of fun. So the Jupiter section is coordinated by Richard Shimoody. Let me go back here. The Saturn section. As with the Venus section, Julius Betten is also the coordinator of the Saturn section. Everybody loves Saturn. Everybody loves to look at the planet, watch the rings as the tilt varies from year to year. And a lot of observations, visual and photographic observations, are made of the planet Saturn. And anybody can contribute. I mean, this is you have to be a member of the Alpo, but membership is relatively inexpensive, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The remote planet section. This is Uranus and Neptune. Visual, photographic, photometric observations are accepted for this. Again, these planets are challenges to see visually any detail, but when you do, and when the sky is right, and the scene is great, it's pretty amazing to see what you can see on Uranus and Neptune. And Richard Shimoody, the coordinator of the Jupiter section, is also coordinator of the remote planet section. You'll see we all wear many hats in this group. The minor planet section. Minor planets, asteroids. This group focuses on light curves, measuring the rotational period of the minor planets. And it's done with some very basic equipment too. You don't need a lot of investment in order to do light curves. You know, it's interesting. Fred Pilcher runs this group, and he's a great resource for anybody that wants to learn how to do photometric observations as well. Comet section. This is one of my favorite sections. My nickname is Cometman for a number of different reasons, but Carl Hergenrother is the coordinator of this group. Carl is actually the chief scientist on the OSIRIS-REx mission to an asteroid that just flew through Bennu and landed its little probe and grabbed some soil. So He's an excellent resource we have in this organization. And I don't know how many of you got to see Comet Neowise last year, but if you have drawings or photographs or just written descriptions of Neowise, send them to Carl. He would be more than welcome to have them and add them to our archive of observations of comets. And 2021 is going to be a pretty decent year for comets as well. So the Meteor Section. You like watching meteor showers? I love watching meteor showers. It's one of my favorite astronomical activities. Where else could you set up a lounge chair, get a sleeping bag, grab some hot chocolate, sit out under the stars, and count meteors all night long? Sounds like fun to me. And that's what the Meteor Section focuses on. Bub Lunsford is the coordinator of that group, and he's on my podcast all the time talking about the different meteor showers we have every year. But it's a great activity. You don't need a telescope. It's a lot of fun to be involved with. Is that the last one? Yeah. Okay, going to the moon now. This is a little bit more in depth of the different areas, the Lunar Topographical Studies and Selected Areas program. We have selected, the Lunar Section has selected various features on the moon that are pretty interesting to observe. They might have different changes that take place throughout the lunar month. So we are always looking for visual and photographic observations of these objects or these features. Dave Teskey is the coordinator of that group. Lunar Meteorite Impact Search. And you're thinking, meteors hitting the moon? We can see that? Yes. A couple total lunar eclipses ago, this group, the Lunar Meteorite Impact Group, had astronomers all over the world videotaping the dark side of the moon. And at the same time, they saw a hit, a little bright flash on the moon. So it was actually a meteor impact. It was confirmed by many different areas. Brian Kudnick is the coordinator of that group. And that's an easy way to observe. You just set up a video camera in your telescope, point it at the dark side during an eclipse. A lot of fun. Lunar Dome Survey. This group has gotten really active lately. It's interesting enough, these lunar domes, as you can see in the photograph there, they are areas that have never been cataloged before on the moon or classified as what type of domes they are. So what the section led by Rafael Elena, they are now cataloging all of the lunar domes on the visible side of the moon and coming up with classifications for what the different ones are. It's kind of interesting. It's an exciting group to be a part of. Eclipses, we all love eclipses. There's a lunar eclipse section, and everything from crater timings, brightness estimates, Dijon scale measurements, photos, and visual observations. Even partial lunar eclipses we do. Keith Spring is the coordinator of that group. And of course, we have a solar section for partial, annular, and total solar eclipses. And anybody that's got observations of past solar eclipses, Keith is always interested in getting those and adding those to our archives as well. You can see there's something for everybody in the Alpo. There really is. It's an interesting organization. Even non-observational sections, a Meteorite section. Dolores Hill runs this group. She actually works at the Lunar and Planetary Laboratory in Phoenix, Arizona, and she studies meteorites. She's got quite the collection. And also, if amateurs or members think they find a meteor, she will help them identify what type of meteorite it is and where it could have come from and things like that. So it's a fun organization, fun part of our group that's non-observational. Here's one of my areas I work, the Alpo Training program. And I have a little bit more slides on this because I think it might be interested in some of your members to maybe be a part of this. It's open to any member of the Alpo, from a beginner to expert. And the goal is to make members more proficient observers. The thing is, the Alpo is only as good as its members are. And the better observers we have, the more value our observations have to the professional community. So it's the responsibility of the Alpo to train observers to be better astronomers. Now, those of you that have telescopes, and you do observing. I'm sure the first time you looked through a telescope and today, your ability to see things through a telescope has improved. Your eyesight has gotten more sensitive to seeing things and different subtle changes in the planets and things. And that's what we focus on in the training program, is learning how to do that and then recording those observations. The training program is two-tiered. The first tier we call the basic level, which is basically reading the handbook that we wrote, the Observer's Handbook, and mastering fundamentals, starting to make drawings at the telescope, and then submitting those drawings to me for evaluation and critique and help you along your way. And it also includes making simple calculations like seeing and transparency, universal time, things like that. Understand observing techniques. What makes you a better observer? And it takes time. When students have completed those skills, they advance to what's called the novice level for further training in one or two areas. So let's say you go through the basic level looking at Saturn, but then you want to go to the novice level as a Saturn observer. Then you start making systematic observations over a period of time of Saturn or the moon or meteors or whatever area you want. You can join the organization, do it that way. There's no time limit to complete the training. The shortest I've ever had anybody complete it was 6 months. And I have students that have been in it for 3 years. And that changes with the weather, life changes, things like that, where they can't observe all the time. And, but it's a very good program. And there's no fee for being in the training program. Like I said, the only requirement is you got to be a member of the Alpo. There's no minimum requirement for telescope. As was mentioned earlier, I joined the Alpo in 1972. I was a young, scrapping teenager with a 60 millimeter refractor. I joined the Alpo with that telescope, and I completed the training program with a 60 millimeter refractor. So it doesn't really matter what type of telescope you have. It works. When you've mastered all the program, you're then certified as an observer. And I got to tell you, the coordinators of the different groups, if you are a certified observer through the training program, your observations go to the top of the pile when they start looking at them for going in the journal. So what are we doing now in the Alpo? Well, astrophotography is cutting edge. Everybody's doing it because the equipment is so good right now. And we have some of the top astrophotographers in the world as members and contributors to the Alpo. Damien Peach, people like that. They are the best, and they contribute to the Alpo in their images. Also, things we're doing now, we obviously have a website, www.alpo-astronomy.org. We have a Facebook page. Just search for ALPO Astronomy and you'll come up with that. We also have a Twitter page. And for meteorites, we also have for rockhounds, where you talk about the different findings and where the meteorites are found. We also have a journal. It's published quarterly. It's called the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I like to call it the Strolling Astronomer because that's what it was called back when I first joined. As I mentioned, it's quarterly. Inside the journal are apparition reports of the planets, any events or close passages or other ongoing things happening. It also has features. We talk about observing techniques, different equipment that you can use, commentary, and previews of upcoming events. And this is where you'll see your observations published. I still remember the first time I had an observation published in the journal is for a comet that I observed. And my observation was used as reference in the article. It was pretty thrilling. There are also news notes, updates on the sections and what's happening in lunar and planetary astronomy. The journal is available in PDF file as well as a hard copy. That happens how we can help out the different levels of membership. As with all hobbies and all endeavors that people are interested in, there's a thing we're calling the graying of the hobby, which is everybody's hair color is turning this color. That's into it now. And the average age of the organizations is growing every year too, not going down. we're trying to motivate, we're trying to bring in the next generation of amateur astronomers into the Alpo. And the ways we're doing that, we look at how's information disseminated. Well, print media is going away. I mean, newspapers are going away, magazines are going away. Everything is now online. The younger audience has everything online. This conversation we're having today, I was going to say tonight because it's night for me, today is online. And we want to reach a younger audience. And also, the internet is a great way to release information on new discoveries and observations. And we're growing our membership this way through our online presence. And we've also started last year the ALPO Youth Section, which is focusing on bringing scout programs, school programs into the Alpo and have them start doing some small observations and contribute to the Alpo in some way. My other endeavor I have is the Observer's Notebook. It's the podcast. I'm sure some of you listen to podcasts. I dropped the first one, the 2017. I can't believe it was that long ago. And it was Matt Will, who's the Secretary Treasurer of the Alpo. And he just gave me a brief history of the Alpo on that one. That first month, we had 25 downloads. Today, we have 113 episodes online. Sanjay's been on one. And we average 85 downloads a day, which is not a lot compared to other interests, but for my little astronomy podcast, the Alpo, I'm pretty pleased with 85 people every day downloading it. We release new episodes on the 1st and 15th of every month. We have listeners from all over the world, outside the US. The most common downloads come from the UK, Canada, Costa Rica, Ireland, and Germany. It's available in all formats, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Amazon Echo. And if you can't get any of those, we have a link right here that takes you directly to it, soundcloud.com/observersnotebook. But if you do, if you have a smartphone and you want to get it, if you listen to podcasts already, it's a pretty simple process. You open your phone, you look for this logo, podcast logo. You click on that, you hit the search icon, or the little thing up in the corner, and you just type in Observer's Notebook, and you'll see a page come up that looks just like this here. And you'll see our little logo. You hit that subscribe button, and you'll never miss an episode of the podcast. They'll be automatically downloaded to your device every single time I put one up. Like I said, the 1st and 15th of every month. There's no cost. It's free. The average in length between 30 minutes and 90 minutes. And we've had all sorts of subjects on the podcast, from the history of amateur astronomy in the US. Every section in the Alpo has had the coordinator come on and give an in-depth talk about it. We had a lot of information on the 2017 total solar eclipse, and I'm sure we'll do the same for our upcoming eclipse here in the States in 2024. Interview with astrophotographer Damian Peach. Many podcasts I've had with Don Mackholtz, who now has his own podcast. Alpo Training program has been a subject of one, planetary imaging. And one of the most popular podcasts we've released in the last month or two has been Carl Hergenrother coming on and talking about the comets in 2021. So as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a pretty decent year. And if you want to find out about it, just download that podcast and listen to Carl and I discuss the comets of this year. The podcast is paid for through donations through our listeners from a service called Patreon. And the Alpo doesn't give us any money, but of course, having a podcast is not cheap. You got to have the equipment. You got to produce a podcast. We have no advertising for the podcast, so we're doing it all ourselves. Other outlets the Alpo has, we have conventions. Every year we have an annual convention. This past year, because of the COVID issue, we held our conference online, and it went really well. We actually had more members at that conference last year than we've had at any previous conference. And the main reason was people didn't have to travel. They could log on, they could listen to all the papers we had. They were all available online, and it was a lot of fun. to have the conference online. It went so well that the 2021 conference is going to be held this summer online once again using Zoom. So, and we also simulcast it on YouTube as you're doing this meeting here. So the conferences are great. You don't need to be a member of the Alpo to attend our conference. So, and it's an interesting time to see what's the latest in our organization. Talk membership. Sorry, these are US dollars. So forgive me for that. But what the membership rates start at $18 a year for the digital, and that's 4 times a year. And then the per paper journal is $45. So it's relatively inexpensive. It's really an organization where amateur astronomers can learn, contribute, talk about what they love in astronomy. And I grew up in an area in Southern California called the San Fernando Valley, and the dimmest star I could see in the night sky was second magnitude. So I was pretty much stuck looking at the moon and the planets. And that's why I jumped on the Alpo when I found them back in the 70s. It was an organization that was talking to me that said, this is, you want to observe these objects, this is the way to do it. And I learned a lot. Like I mentioned, I went through the training program at 17 years old, and it taught me a lot. And now I coordinate the training program. Here's some contact information. My email address, if you're interested, is cometman@cometman.net. We have a Twitter account for the podcast. It's Observers NB Pod. We have a Facebook page for the podcast. It's Observers Notebook. And then, of course, the Facebook page for the Alpo is Alpo Astronomy. Website, alpo./astronomy.org. And the Alpo's Twitter account is Alpo Astronomy. I believe that's all I got. Any questions you might have, or?
Thank you, Tim. That was an excellent overview of the organization, and I'm sure like all the sections that you described are quite inspiring, and the contributions can easily be given by people even with very little tools. We are. So I think we'll kind of continue the conversation. I don't see too many questions right away, but I think they will slowly come as.
Okay. Well, Sanjay, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for a very nice presentation on Alpo. Excellent job. And Tim's podcasts are quite interesting. I would recommend we should try to listen to some of them, not all, but they're quite informative. They're capable.
All of them.
Well, sure, of all, yeah. And like he mentioned, Damien Peach, right now he's one of the greatest amateur photographers. I mean, I see his pictures of Jupiter, and it's hard to, get the zeal to go out, get your own telescope out and try to image Jupiter as well as he does. It's just amazing.
His Mars images last year were remarkable.
Yeah. Just a couple of tidbits. I had the pleasure of actually meeting Clyde Tombaugh in 1984 in Flagstaff in the same dome, the Pluto telescope. And Rita Beebe introduced me to him. Clyde was there with his wife. And this was a conference on time variable phenomena in the Jovian system. And he brought colored drawings of Jupiter. And I had never, ever imagined that Clyde was such a wonderful drawing artist. These were done in colored pencil, and I have a picture of him that I've been trying to find in my archives for quite some time. This was 1984, so obviously a long time away. And the second tidbit I have is that since the focus has been on Mars last week, the discovery of the global dust storm on Mars was made by one of the greatest astrophotographers so far, and that's Don Parker. He was in Chicago, and Tim, I'm sure you know the story, that he was looking at Mars, and he had built his own 20-inch telescope, and there's actually a video, hour and a half long video on how they refurbished his mirror at the Adler Planetarium telescope lab that used to exist many, many years ago. But he had dragged out his telescope and was looking at Mars in 1969. And he wasn't doing much photography then. This was visual, and he was surprised that Mars was very blurry, and he thought something had gone wrong with his telescope. And then Marina 9 got there and saw the same picture, and then discovered that it was a global dust storm. And many, many years later, I had the pleasure of actually staying with Don in Coral Gables and learning to use the Registax program to image Jupiter. And my complaint always to him was, Don, hey, I observed Jupiter also. We had met during an Alpo meeting in Madison. And even though Jupiter is wonderful to photograph, I was working on Venus. I always would plead Don to take a look at Venus, image Venus. But his telescope was set up outside his bedroom, and there was a tree, and he could never ever get the telescope to point at Venus. But I miss Don. I think he was a wonderful person, a physician by training. He
was quite the character.
He was an amazing person. But some things I wanted to add, and our team is quite aware of it. The planetary missions actually have relied quite a bit on amateur images of the planets Mars, Jupiter, and Venus. And I think Don actually has a paper published in Icarus some years back, one of the few papers by an amateur in a professional journal. I forget the year, but I think sometime in 1980s, I think. And amateur astronomers have been part of many professional papers also. Most recently, of course, Venus has had a large interest in Europe with Venus Express and with Akatsuki, because typically what happens with missions around Venus is that it's difficult to observe Venus throughout the orbit. And for a variety of reasons, there are gaps in the coverage, and you want to fill them in with the ground-based images. And so some of the UV visible images from amateurs have been quite useful. Agustin Sanchez La Vega has published a paper, I think, and many of his colleagues. And there's a separate archive in Europe that his group runs. I don't have the link, but you can probably find it. I think there may be a link on my venus.vis.edu. That site is a little bit out of date, but when we were funded for Venus Express, we used to maintain that, and we used to have page for amateur images. But Akatsuki is still covering Venus, of course, from orbit, and Venus images are still very useful, and Tim showed some examples at many wavelengths. Anyway, I'll stop there, but to see if there are any questions.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for. You are the Venus man, like Tim is the comet man, and so we have some questions regarding participation in the ALPO. So thanks for highlighting that. Amateur astronomers with their ground-based observations can contribute to gaps which the scientific missions may have. So, but then there are some school students also here and some youngsters who want to know if they can contribute to ALPO without being a member. So that's sometimes a repeating question here.
Well, the youth program right now, it doesn't require you to be a member of the Alpo. It's Facebook only. So if you've got a Facebook account, you can go there and sign up there and learn more about what the youth section is doing. So we used to have a junior membership in the Alpo, but we got rid of that because we didn't have any more juniors. So Like I mentioned, it is relatively inexpensive, but if it's, it's, you can contribute. If you observe meteor showers and you want to send your observations in, you can do that. You can always submit them. I mean, we'll take any observations anybody wants to submit. I can't guarantee they'll get published, but they will definitely be, they'll be used if there is some value to them, and that's the thing.
Definitely. So this the gist is that they should take valuable observations. To do that, I think you have to be perseverant and start observing first, and then continue observing for a while, so you get accustomed to what is good data, what is not so much, and then you can try submitting. Also, I think I will suggest that it's always a question. I mean, I'll be very informal here that the cost is so much, but then you can always have a group contributing, and
Yes.
as a group, you could take a subscription that would come out to be cheaper, and you could share some of the resources. I think
that's true. Like I said, the cheapest membership is a digital copy of the journal,
right?
And you can share that among your friends.
Yeah, and I mean, you could have like a club membership, and I think Ayuka could cover a group, for example. You're doing um, quite a few programs yourselves, especially with your connection with the IAU.
Sure.
I think that there's a good bit of overlap. And one other question that I might want to touch upon, and I don't think there's a separate group for it, but the local astronomy club here in Madison, you often get questions. I want to buy a telescope. What kind of a telescope should I buy?
Right. Yes.
That's very common. Now in India, I'm sure there are a few manufacturers coming out with the Indian telescopes because to import from overseas, it's relatively expensive. And telescopes have evolved quite a bit over time. But that's a common question. And typically, I mean, almost every month somebody will call up and say, hey, I want to buy a telescope. And what I've usually first tell them is that first get a pair of binoculars. Find out how difficult it is to hold it steady. And then when you realize it, start with a small pole like 7 by 25 or 7 by 50 or something like that.
Right.
Go to a bigger pair of binoculars and then invest in a good tripod. And then go to a telescope. I give this advice, whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but at least I think that sometimes people get too ambitious looking at these pictures and say, okay, I want to go buy a telescope and I want to take pictures as good as what Damien does. One of my nephews did that. He suddenly felt like he had to go out. Lives in Washington D.C. and one night we put his 10-inch telescope and dragged it out to a golf course. We first of all had to hunt for a dark spot which was not completely surrounded by bright lights, and even then, on a cool night, it was quite a challenge to find an object that you wanted to go to. I mean, or even if it's a computer-guided scope, it still takes some time to set it up. And of course, you want to set it up before it gets too dark or too cold, and so that you are ready to observe. But those are some of the things that something like Ayuka could do. One other activity that I was involved in many years ago was remotely operable telescopes. Of course, it has nothing to do with Alpo per se. I don't think that there has ever been a group, Tim, that I'm aware of. But like Hands-on Universe, they basically talk to a telescope operator. But in our local school district here, there was some interest in starting a telescope, and one teacher actually went and got a grant. I had written a proposal. They didn't fund me, but suddenly the school district found out that it had some extra money at the end of the school year, and they approved $25,000. And so they built a facility in the school forest. They built a telescope, remotely operable. That was the idea. But they could still take the school kids out to that telescope a few, maybe 10, 20 kilometers out, and show them how to use the telescope and get some images. We couldn't quite get the remote operation because there was no high-speed connection. And I was trying to get talk to a local telecommunication company to set up a microwave communication link to my office, and then we were going to try to figure it out, but somehow that never happened. And sometime after that, I think there was a large English group that started a big telescope in Hawaii, and they tried to operate that on a subscription basis. There were some groups in Georgia, I think somewhere in the south, commercial. They would also you pay some small amount, and you could control the telescope remotely. But that
Yeah,
actually has kind of died off, I think.
there's a program called SLO Telescope in Chile. It's a series of
Okay,
5 telescopes. I'm a member of that. You can book telescope time on it. It's really relatively expensive, but there's some
yeah,
large telescopes so you can do
oh,
observations that way. And it'd be a
yeah,
good thing for maybe a subscription for the organization to buy into and get that where its members can actually use a large telescope and do
right.
programs.
And Pig to Meteor was made available recently
Yes.
for amateurs also, I think.
Thank you.
But in principle, I know at least Pune University was working on a telescope. I don't know if it became operational or not, because last time I had any information about it, the IA,
Ferguson
IAA.
College was actually working on a remotely observing telescope. Ferguson College in the Pune University. Yes, that's true.
I see.
But I think that there are, one of the things I prescribe always to the attendees here is that join a group. It's always
Yeah.
more beneficial to work in a group. And if you can join an organization, even online, that's a great thing to do. Because in that way, you can pool in resources to buy a better telescope maybe.
Right.
Or, if there's a set of telescopes, you can borrow one as a library borrowing. Instead of a book, you borrow a telescope, do an observation, give it back. So these would be nice ideas if the attendees could, look around for groups in your area or form your own group and slowly grow it. Like all these organizations that we have exposed you to over the series have somehow grown from small group, interested group to a, nice large, group with a goal and some great contributions. So start small, but start with a group is what we always suggest. Yeah. So these are, these are some of the golden words from the seniors coming to us. We take note of these for Ayuka as well. Thank you for that, Sanjay. We have there's a question about somebody's already eager to observe in the coming future. So are there any kind of observing events or bright comets, etc., that you might prescribe to people to keep a lookout for? Tim?
Wow.
There always are.
There's always something. Yeah. Mars is still visible in the evening sky. The moon is every single night. It's out there.
Almost.
Almost. Yeah. There's a lot to see on the moon. I'm disappointed when I talk to amateurs that plan their observing sessions around the moon when it's not visible, because there's so much to see. We do have some brighter comets coming, and by brighter, I don't necessarily mean naked eye. We might have a naked eye comet later in the year. I refuse to jump on that bandwagon until I see it with my own eyes. But the larger planets are going to the morning sky, and so it's there's always meteor showers you can do very easily without a telescope. And those are always helpful with our organization as well. I mean, if you observe a meteor shower, send Bob your observations, and I'm sure he would be more than happy to have them. And so the best thing to do, I think, is subscribe to the podcast, because I talk about the latest events, what's happening now in the sky, in the podcast as well. I mean, when Mars reaches opposition, I have a podcast on Mars with Roger Venable, the coordinator of the group. Anytime there's a meteor shower in the sky, a good one that's not going to be washed out by the moon or something else, I have Bob on for that. Anytime the planets are coming into the sky, any comets. I mean, I probably did 4 comet podcasts with Carl last year as Neowise did its thing and other comets faded out. So that's one way to stay on top, because I say I release them on the 1st to 15th, but if something happens tonight, I'll record a podcast tomorrow and get it out there. But the regular ones are every other week, basically.
Okay.
But
yeah,
definitely, it's something to do.
Yeah, I hope everybody goes to the page and listens to all the 180 episodes, 180 plus episodes. I think that will be a good use of your weekends. And in case somebody has some observations, I can see Gautam is here. He's asking this question. If there are some observations that they want to confirm, is there a way that Alpo could help them out with that?
Yeah, I would definitely. If you have questions, send me an email at cometman@cometman.net, and I will be more than happy to point you in the right direction within the Alpo where you should go.
That's great to know. So cometman@cometman.net is
That's it.
where you can find him. Thank you very much. So other questions, as I said, we'll have questions like what are sunspots, what is dark matter, what are black holes. I'm not going into that. I'm sorry for not taking in these questions in this particular discussion. Ayuka has a lot of lectures on our YouTube channel. Please go through them. You'll find your answers to these kinds of questions there. But then we have some specialists here in observations in helping you use your amateur astronomer groups or tools. So if you could put in some relevant questions, we still have a little time. Maybe until then you could share a little more if there's anything that we left out. Sanjay, how was your, I'm sorry, just, I'm sorry to play this, but you're from India. So how was your experience? What is your suggestion for the Indian amateurs here?
You're asking me about my experience?
What's your experience, as well as if you have any
well, I'll tell you, I was lucky that I grew up in Delhi.
Okay.
But I was born in Pune,
okay.
Zushi Hospital in Deccan Gymkhana.
Right.
So I know that area very well, and I know Ganesh Kind area well. But then my parents moved to Delhi, moved with them, and then in I think sixth grade, sixth or seventh, I think I ended up getting glasses.
Oh.
Okay. These were the good old days where you actually went to an optician and they made your lenses. And luckily, there was a glass shop not far from where our house was, where I had to go to get my glasses once I got my prescription.
Okay.
And as in India, they start teaching physics at very early age, 6, 7, 8. We already had laws, Newton's laws, etc., things like that, and we were doing optics. And while I was waiting for my glasses there, and I could see the lenses being ground and polished and turned into glasses. I said, can I buy separate lenses? Of course, the resources were not very much. I mean, you didn't have PVC pipes available then. I had the lenses, but how do you make a telescope out of it? And instead of getting two convex lenses, I actually got one objective convex and one, because I didn't want to see the moon upside down. I wanted to use it both for, ground objects, nature and sky. And I got a concave lens. But it was difficult to get a small enough concave lens. So I didn't have very large power. Then I had to make tubes out of cardboard. And you can't put a small tube into a big tube and make it slide. So I had to get the same diameter lenses, and then that's how I discovered all sorts of issues of optics like chromatic aberration and magnification, etc. But it was fun to look at the moon. So that was my first telescope in the sixth grade. And one thing that I was going to mention earlier, and maybe Tim has ground his own mirror or his lens, was that there used to be a magazine, Srishtidnya. I remember reading in that magazine in 1950s or 60s, I think, or at least must have been late 50s, how to grind your own lens or mirror. And that used to be taught at the Adler Planetarium lab. That's where Don Parker's 20-inch Newtonian mirror was created. That now is a lost art, I think. And maybe Tim has some thoughts on it. I don't know if people are still making their own mirrors or not. I mean, nobody's grinding their lenses anymore I mean, you're better off.
Actually, so I'll just pitch in here from the India perspective. So IUCAA has a very active telescope making program, and I also train all the people here. We have a small room here in IUCAA if you want to come make a telescope with us.
Wonderful.
The same process, we go to the Boreal, get a piece of glass, and then people actually grind it for a week, and then they get the shape, this polishing, and we help them get the aluminization done for free at the IUCAA 2-meter observatory, which anyway gets aluminized every 2 months. So every 3 months. So they get that done free. Of course, the rest of the things we train them how to do. And so any of you who are interested, who are not in Pune, can also do this, because we are ready to help you online. You can just write to us and look at the web page for IUCAA SciPop, where there's a separate link for how to make your own telescope. There's also a great resource, a book by P.N. Shankar, one of the greats of astronomy, but also astronomy popularizer. And he's got this really lovely book on how to make telescopes. It's very detailed with all these details that you were describing, Sanjay. All these nitty-gritties are mentioned there. It's a great experience to learn physics and optics as well.
I have a suggestion for you.
Yes, please.
Why don't you write a short article on your lab, the telescope making lab, and submit to the Alpo Journal? What do you think, Tim? Or do a
that'd
podcast?
be good.
Well,
Yeah, we could.
do
Yeah,
a
we could do
podcast.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned telescope making, because I thought back when I got into it, we had John Dobson out here in California who came up with the Dobsonian telescope, and I knew of telescope making back then, but recently I hadn't heard of anybody doing it. And
I know. I mean,
I was on the Cloudy Nights website. I don't know if you're familiar with that, the Cloudy Nights website. And a young teenage kid put an article about that on there, about how a group of his friends and himself were building their own telescopes.
Yeah.
And I was excited about it. So I contacted him. I actually have a podcast where I talk to this guy. And there's like 6 of them, and they're building their own, anything from 4-inch reflectors up to 16-inch. They're doing their own mirrors and everything. So it's alive and well. Yeah. It's alive and well,
Yes, true.
And I just wanted to emphasize with him, okay, you built it, now use it. Use it. Look through it. Don't put a camera on it. Look through it.
Right. So yes, I mean, this is definitely the next advice that is to be given. I can see there are some questions from a teacher. I mean, same thing. They're asking, I don't have a telescope, but I want to have one for my students. So we will prescribe, you just make one yourself. Okay?
Yeah, make one yourself.
And we are ready to help. It will cost you much less, and you'll have the the advantage of knowing and talking about optics to children, which is a very practical way of telling them about lenses and glasses.
And I mean, you can go very far with it. You can do the knife test and all sorts of things, testing the curvature, the surface smoothness, etc. Figure, and then get into telescopes. And I'm glad Tim mentioned Dobsonian, because that's a fairly easy mount to build. Mm-hmm. And these days, I mean, building a mount itself is quite an art.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are works of art.
Very true. Yeah, so that's the point made, that people should try to make their own telescope, and they are quite useful. They're just as effective, and start your observations as soon as possible, probably in a group.
Yeah, it's fun to go to Stellafin and these other telescope gatherings. I've been to a few, and the people bring their telescopes, and it's amazing to watch. Mm-hmm. Like 30-inch telescopes that needs a trailer to bring, but they're literally beautiful pieces of equipment.
Yeah, living out here in Southern California, I went to Big Bear, the Riverside Telescope Makers Conference, for many, many, many years. And there was a guy there that brought a 36-inch reflector every single year, and I'm like,
That's right.
yeah, I just didn't want to go on top of the ladder to look through it. That was too high. But it was the equipment that, because it's Riverside Telescope maker, so it was everybody that built their own telescopes came out there, and some of the things we saw.
And then if you put some cameras at the eyepiece end, people would devise their own Peltier coolers with an ice bucket. They got the pump noise going. And then you discuss all sorts of issues like fogging, so what do? You get a dew cap, you got a heater, you got to do this. But it's fun. But those challenges, eventually, if you become a professional astronomer, you had to start worrying about those. I mean, I remember going to the Wind Telescope, and the Wind Telescope was designed specifically for that reason, to keep the mirror as close to the ambient temperature. So the telescope was wide open. It was one of the first such telescope designs, completely open to the outside air, no dome. But we had to deal with the weather, and wind and turbulence, and adaptive optics. And maybe Don Brun used to make these voice coil operated image stabilization units. And I'm so sorry that I didn't buy one back when it was available for not too much money. And we used one at Yerkes. It was a voice coil technology quadrant stabilizer, ready to work like a charm. I mean, I've taken 90-second images of Jupiter, and they are beautiful through Yerkes 24-inch. And unfortunately, he stopped making them. I think he had sold it to Santa Barbara Group, and they never came out with anything like that, which is. But some amateur could probably reinvent it.
Yes, definitely. I think that's the thing. That's the idea here, that there are several aspects of amateur astronomy. It's not just knowing about popular things about black holes or stories about neutron stars or supernovae. It's a big field, and there's a lot of contribution to be done from, even if you're not a PhD in astrophysics. So you can start right from school and go to that level as well. And I mean, the professor just said that these technologies have uses. Not you may start at a lower level, but you might invent something which is used on a spacecraft or a big telescope at some point of time.
Well, your Himalayan Chandra telescope, for example, I don't know if they ever got the adaptive optics system to work.
Okay, I don't have an idea about that.
Because that's a major issue. I mean, you got a beautiful telescope at 5,000 meters.
Yeah,
you have seeing.
I think there's some work on that, and especially IUCAA itself has a 2-meter class telescope with robotic AO and the technology that we are kind of building, and also it's being used on other telescopes like the 11-meter telescopes. But that's the gist of it, that the amateurs should start not considering themselves any less. You have a lot of contribution to do, and you either make instruments, make it yourself kind of thing, or if you already have some instruments, share them with the group, take observations, and then share them to the community, which basically increases the database. And there are gaps which scientific missions may not be covering, so which is what you should pitch in for. So I think that's that's a good kind of summary of the conversation. But of course, thank you all for making us aware of the ALPO, which is a big help, because otherwise we are all taking our own observations here and there, but we don't know where to go and talk with like-minded people. So everybody's encouraged to join the ALPO and share it with the whole community. So thank you, Tim. Thank you, Sanjay ji, for coming here and taking your time. It's quite late at your place.
Yeah.
Cold as well. So we'll, if you have any last parting words, you're welcome to share them.
I again want to thank you for the invite. This was a pleasure. It's nice to see amateur astronomers all over the world that are interested in this, and clear skies.
Thank you so much.
I'll echo that, and I'll urge you again to write that article.
All right.
And do a podcast with him.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks to the whole Alpo team, in fact, for enabling this session. And we look forward to combining our efforts, joining you to more of the very serious amateur astronomers. I think about 60 people attended the talk today, so I consider that a success, both on YouTube and Zoom. And thank you everyone for joining in, and we'll keep you in the know. We've had a small gap last month in this series, but we'll bring you more organizations where you can get information about how you can contribute to science. So do keep a lookout, and thanks. Let's thank the guests again and bid them goodbye. Thank you very much. Sanjay and Tim.
Namaste. Bye.
Stay.